Hi everyone, welcome to the new episode of the Prime View series of interviews with top business and technology leaders. I'm Dana Kohut, your host. Recently, we had the pleasure to sit and talk with Brad Maltz, Senior Director of Advanced Development at Dell Corporation. Brad is often referred to as a veteran of technology industry. And in this interview, we talked about the difference between converged and hyper-converged infrastructure. We talked about the importance of innovation gene within the corporation and how important it is to contribute to open source ecosystem. It's a great interview with lots of valuable insights. So don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the PrimeView YouTube channel not to miss the other great interviews coming your way. Stay tuned. Hi Brad, thank you for joining me today. My first question is about your career trajectory and your current responsibilities at Dell. So if you could elaborate a little bit on the specific processes that you are driving at the company and what are your responsibilities there?
Sure, I'd love to. So I've been in the industry roughly for 21, 22 years. My background kind of is, I've been through many different roles, including even at Dell. But really, my career is journeyed through originally being a software engineer, doing development, test engineering, solutions engineering. That actually was at my first company, was Data General, right out of college. I actually transitioned into the startup world for a few years after Data General, where I actually learned how to kind of go after more the managed services route. So I was learning kind of how to go substantiate backup as a service, restore as a service, storage as a service, and doing that with a startup that I learned so much in that world that it just kind of added to my repertoire. I had to learn things like Solaris, AIX, True 64. So I was getting heavy into the OS game at that point. Once I got out of that, I actually ended up going to EMC for a little while and doing a stint in the field. It's funny though, because at that point in time, I didn't think I wanted to be customer focused. I didn't think I wanted to be in the field, talking directly to customers on a daily basis, driving around all the time. So I kind of went kicking and screaming a little bit, I'll be honest with you. But what ended up happening was I loved it. And I was basically brought into EMC to help architect and implement Clarion at the time, right? So this is kind of early 2000s. Rolling out of that, what I realized was I loved this customer thing so much that I ended up then starting a company with a few other folks, and we became a national consulting company, professional services and reseller. And I was the CTO of that company. In that world, my experience kind of multiplied exponentially. I was also very tight with a lot of companies like, again, VMware, Cisco, EMC, and a lot of those shops. So I was out there learning what customers really desired, how to help solve customer problems. And I learned earlier on in my career around this time that my passion was really in problem solving. It was in being creative to deliver outcomes. Well, that was some of the best years. I would say that was about 13 years roughly of my career, was kind of building up that company, working with a ton of customers across, it ended up being across the globe at the end of it. And through that, I was also on a lot of advisory boards. So I was working with a lot of startups, kind of on the bleeding edge of a lot of different ecosystems, just trying to figure out how they would solve my customer problems. One of the advisory boards I was actually on was EMC, because we were a big partner. And in basically being on that advisory board, I got to meet John Rose, who was the CTO of EMC at the time. And lo and behold, when I was looking for an opportunity, John had an opportunity. That led me to join EMC at that point. And I joined on board basically being the head of strategy for CI and HCI for John, right? So this was early in the EMC kind of jaunt into converged and hyperconverged. But I was able to use a lot of my background, all the different operating systems, all the virtualization with VMware, all the full stack conversations, and try to help steer EMC internally, strategically, into the right markets, into the right opportunities, and try to help to make sure the right technologies were the winning ones within the company. Of course, I can go into more detail at the Dell level, but between Dell and EMC, I would say I've probably changed roles almost every year. Every year of change, though, I've always been tied into the CTO office. And as of about 3 years ago, Under John, what we actually figured out we needed to do inside Dell at that point post-merger is we wanted to understand how could we potentially incubate technologies differently or kind of reinvigorate a lot of that incubation DNA post-merger. So John sent me down the path of kind of what we called incubating incubation at that point. And in doing that, that led me into my role now, which is basically leading advanced development within the infrastructure solutions group in Dell Technologies for Paul Perez. So there's a little bit of a journey through my career at this point.
That's a great story, and I really like the focus that you had from the very onset of your career. Being a part of virtualization technology from early 2000s, that is something absolutely amazing.
I loved that market. It was one that I saw the promise of it back in, I think it was 1.5 or 2.0 of ESX. So it was pretty early, and I became a huge evangelist for that very early on.
Brad, in your current role at Dell, you have the ability to observe many innovative ideas. So I was wondering, would you consider the most exciting technology for you personally, and where do you see what technology would make the highest impact on commercial side of the market?
Yeah, that's a hard question because I do get to see a lot, by the way, right? Because being in the CTO office at Dell specifically, I kind of get overarching view of everything that's going on in the company. Now, in doing that, when I think about personally what excites me from a technology perspective, I have to say I'm a science geek. So I grew up with watching the science movies and all that type of stuff. And artificial intelligence for me, just the promise of artificial intelligence is probably one that I look at it as like, wow, this has so much promise just in our personal lives as well as in the industry. Now, converting that over to my day job and watching artificial intelligence kind of seep into our personal lives, whether it's through mobile devices or gaming or whatever else. In the is, I would say artificial intelligence and machine learning have an even larger impact that is not realized yet, right? And that's why from an innovation perspective, when we look at something like AI, people start talking about autonomous infrastructure. They start talking about self-driven kind of infrastructure stacks, management and orchestration stacks. And you're really going after the notion that when can we help people not have to do the mundane tasks that we've been doing for 30 or 40 years in technology? When do people not have to manage the low-level things? When can the systems at some level take care of patching themselves and take care of basic configuration tasks and basic triage tasks? When can we as a company and as an industry truly deliver more of these intelligent outcomes? That's really one thing inside of Dell that we have a big focus on. And that's one thing that excites me as we look at building and innovating in technology going forward.
Did I get it right that AI is that single point technology that right now is being very nascent, but once developed to its full capabilities, will have the biggest impact on the commercial side of technologies?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that ties into the notion that the industry has a shortage of people. And because it's going to get worse as we go forward, we need to figure out how people as a resource can be better utilized at doing the hard things, at doing the things that also excite them, that kind of helps them drive their own careers. The more that we can offload from people, the more it's going to help the industry as a whole. And I think that's really where AI is going to kind of accelerate over the next, I would say, it's happening now, but 1 to 10 years, we're going to see it exponentially accelerating.
Well, with the point that you have just made, you are preempting my next question, which is, I know that you are overseeing incubator program at Dell. Maybe you could tell a little bit more about the program that you're driving there.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great one. So one part of my job inside of Dell is actually to run this program that we actually call Eureka. Now, this actually was born out of the need to actually enable everybody's voices in the company to be heard from an innovation perspective, right? A lot of times when you have a company as large as Dell, everybody has ideas. I mean, it's just human nature to have ideas, right? You have them at home, you have them at work, you have them wherever. The problem most people have is getting their voice heard. And what we realized when we were looking about how to kind of ignite the innovation gene and really drive incubation inside the company is we needed a mechanism, a process, and a tool to actually help the general population of the company to be able to get their voice heard better. And so out of that, we actually built this program we call Eureka, which it's an internal tool and process which allows anybody internally with a Dell.com email to basically be able to go and submit an idea. And what that's doing is it's giving people the ability to get their idea surfaced up to a group of fairly senior people in the company that are spanning across all organizations, business units, product management, CTO, engineering, strategy, you name it. And it's giving us the ability to really pick those diamonds in the rough out and be able to drive those forward into different use cases and into potentially products. It could be process oriented. It could be HR or finance oriented. We really don't limit the innovation in the company because when we look at innovation, I kind of have this learning I've read about over the years, which is there's 4 types of innovation, right? There's kind of this incremental innovation. It's one that every business is going to do. It's taking a roadmap and continuing pushing that roadmap forward. You have disruptive innovation, which is kind of like taking your technology and going and disrupting an entire market. It's not a technology innovation as much as you're just going to go disrupt that market. You then have kind of these radical innovation, right? With radical innovation, what you're really going after there is you're creating a new market. You're basically, it's very technology heavy. We're going to go and do some DNA level something, and it's going to go all of a sudden blow out this brand new market and create markets. And then you have more of the architectural innovation, which is taking technology kind of and going after certain new areas, but hard innovating technology in that kind of similar market opportunity. I've learned that, by the way, from it. It's not a thing I created. This is an industry. If you Google those types of innovations, are out there. When I look at innovation within Dell, we tend to hit all 4 of those boxes, right? Some of them are process, some of them are business, some of them are technology. We're heavy on the technology, obviously.
Well, that is fascinating. And maybe you could share with our listeners what are the steps for validating an idea within Eureka program?
Definitely. So we have a process in the company that we call curation. I mean, standard word, but it's an ability for us to make sure that initially we have to do a sniff test, right? And the sniff test initially is basically, does this idea have any merit? It might not be an actual opportunity yet, but kind of, is it something that's so tactical, people have thought about it, it's already being done, or it doesn't make sense? If it passes through all those gates and it's like, yeah, this kind of might make sense, then we have to go and make sure that the ideas make it to the right person. And that's where this curation and routing discussion comes in. Because Dell is such a large company, we need to make sure that it's not one team focused on all innovation. We'd never scale that way. So we make sure that once the idea passes that sniff test, then it goes to kind of the assigned group that's going to try to take that idea into what we call validation. How do you validate it? Do you talk to customers if it's a customer thing? Do you do a technology feasibility assessment? Do you do a market analysis competitively or through some of the analysts? And depending on the different vectors you want to kind of validate it, not everything makes it through that, because a lot of times it's not going to be valid. It's not solving a customer problem. It's not solving an internal problem. But it was a good idea. If it passes through those gates, then it has to get prioritized somewhere within the company, right? And that's the hardest part with any innovation, because you have competing priorities in most large companies, right? That's where I would say, you see the funnel stripping down from, let's say, 1,000 ideas down to 100 ideas, down to maybe like 10 ideas that actually can make it through implementation. But usually those 10 ideas are really well kind of validated and thought out to the point that you're not guaranteed success, but you're at least guaranteed you're going in the right direction.
Well, that would be great if you could share one idea, innovative idea that's gone through the rigorous process of validation and got developed within Dell or separately.
I can give you one that's made it to market. So actually, there's one of the earliest ones that we ever had done was actually our data protection portfolio, and this was years back. It wasn't going after Kubernetes yet. It wasn't going after containerized workloads. Well, internally, there was a bunch of people talking about this. The idea was submitted that, hey, we probably need to go and enable our data protection portfolio with container backup technologies. It ran through the process. It got incubated. Actually, it was an advanced development project in my team. Funny enough, we worked with open source technologies to actually pull some of this off. And in doing that, what happened was, I think it was about 6 months in the product team, and then made it out to market within roughly about a year to a year and a half. That's one of our shining examples of one that, that's a very easy one to walk through, because it was a known problem that we knew we had to go after, but the idea of the implementation was actually kind of the novelty.
So, Brad, how do you inspire the thriving innovation culture at Dell? Is there a secret sauce to the process that you could share with our audience?
I don't know if I have a secret. That would be awesome. If I figured out the formula, I'd probably be in a different spot. But I think I know what you mean. For me, there's a few different angles you want to take kind of from a cultural perspective. One of them is, and I practice this every single day, is you need to be able to exemplify a mentality of innovation. You need to be open for discussion. You need to be willing to listen. You need to have empathy when you're working with others, to basically say, my idea might not be the best one. Your idea might be better than mine. Let's talk. You need to instill a mentality within the culture that allows people to kind of work together. And if you are not instilling that kind of ability to work together in the culture, then right off the bat, you're going to kind of shoot innovation down a little bit. The second thing is you also need to show the willingness to transform as a company, as a person. And what that means is, just because we've been operating a certain way for a certain time frame doesn't mean it's the right answer for the next 5 years. An example of that, inside of Dell, part of my organization, my advanced development team, I have these what we call dojos. They're based on Pivotal dojos from the company Pivotal, right? And they practice a very, very specific mentality, right? It's tied around things like lean agile, test-driven development, CI/CD. I'll use all the buzzwords. And the key there also is paired programming. And the group basically practices a mentality that allows them to iterate on ideas extremely quickly, so that every few weeks, if it's a bad idea or if it's actually going in the wrong direction, either pivot it or stop it, right? And with that type of mentality, that is the type of culture that inside of a large company, you need to have pockets of that, because you need to have people see that, yes, we have to deliver product, and product has a different delivery cycle than innovation sometimes, like big innovation, radical innovation, right? But you need to be able to pull both of those off, which means you need different processes, different engineering mentalities, even different product management mentalities. And part of that is being an exemplar in the company for how people can look at other teams doing it different ways. So that's another initiative, is to help transform people from a process perspective inside of the company. The third one is honestly an evangelization discussion. You got to get out there and you got to make people aware that, pick your head up sometimes, think out of the box, do it differently, and make sure that if you think you have an amazing idea, then push hard to get your idea heard. I've actually had people that have submitted ideas, whether it's in Eureka or just inside conversations, that, initially the idea wasn't well thought out. It just didn't feel right, but they were persistent to the point that, after a few months, it's like, wow, that actually has some merit now. You've thought through, you've modified it. And because of your persistence, now it makes sense to probably go have other conversations with other people in the company. That is the type of thing that, again, it's a personal type of drive that we try to instill in people, just to keep pushing forward. Don't give up.
Well, that last point that you made really resonates with me, as I can see many people that they give up on ideas that have been rejected, while probably what they should have done is thinking through the idea, refining it, and then resubmitting, right? Just to make sure that they are persistent enough, that they're making sure their idea is heard. Brad, I can see that throughout your career you had leadership positions in converged and hyperconverged infrastructure. And while I believe that most our listeners are familiar with those two concepts, maybe you could briefly describe the differences between those two approaches and which one is more applicable to modern data centers, enterprise data centers.
Sure. So the original version of this discussion was converged infrastructure. That was the first out of the gate, right? And the notion of converged infrastructure was really tied back to marrying together a storage technology, traditionally more of a storage array, with a set of compute technologies, right, servers, mixed with networking technologies, and kind of delivering them as an integrated stack from the manufacturer, from the factory, which the promise of that was to accelerate people in the data center from having to go stand up their own infrastructure, right? It was supposed to leapfrog them and get them there quicker to time to value. That was definitely the first one out of the gate. Companies like VCE, right, were some of the earlier ones. Then you go and actually look at hyperconverged. And when the hyperconverged market came out, it was playing off of two trends. Well, actually three trends. One trend was the virtualization trend. The ability to embed virtualization into an appliance was giving us the ability to kind of automate more things. The second thing was software-defined X, right? Software-defined storage, software-defined networking. Really, software-defined storage is the original one, and the promise was of taking a storage layer and not having it be a totally separate physical box, of having that be co-resident inside of the same box that was actually running the execution framework, whether it was the virtual machines or whatever. And the third premise of hyperconverged was going after making an IT admin's job simple, easy, giving them the easy button to deploy that full stack to be able to be up and running with the virtual machines in X number of minutes or hours, and having the daily management of that stack be super simple because it's all software defined. You basically were able to automate that to an extreme degree compared to a converged infrastructure stack that typically had a separate storage array from separate compute, even if it had a virtualization layer, which was very common. So the HCI market, I would say, definitely took off once that became more mature. The two markets are still very viable today, right? I'm definitely seeing HCI taking over a lot of the opportunities out there. But in the CI space, that always went after the notion that if you need a special performing, higher performing storage layer or extra storage services or extra ways of scaling the two layers independently because of the extremes of scalability there, many times converged would actually satisfy those use cases. HCI originally was going after what I would say is the low-hanging fruit, kind of the dev machines. Then it went up to more tier 2 production. HCI now is in the tier 1 production game. It also has the ability to do scalability and a little bit more disaggregate, all the way there yet, but it's getting there. So I would say HCI is catching up with the CI markets for the type of workloads. It really becomes an operating discussion for the customer and how they want to consume the two of them, right? If the customer has matured themselves into a market where they actually are going full autonomous infrastructure as code, all that type of stuff, I would say you have the ability to use both CI and HCI. You got to look to see which ecosystem is more mature for your operating model and the way that you want to drive your technology going forward. But they're still both very viable.
Well, that's a great explanation, and I believe our listeners will have a better understanding now of each of the approach, CI and HCI. What I'm specifically curious to know about is that on the current market, there are plenty of those solutions available, right? So how does Dell differentiate its CI, HCI solution comparing to the competition?
I mean, a few quick ones on that. Maturity. Okay. We've been around for a long time, doing this for a long time. We have the #1 hypervisor built into our stack. VxRail, obviously in this case for HCI, this has been our de facto platform with VMware go to market with. And the fact is, we have put in so much automation and so much innovation within the actual tooling and the architecture of Rail that it really is able to solve almost anybody's problem from a use case perspective and fit into a very, very large swath of use cases within the industry now. So because of our extensive use cases that we can go after, that's what makes Rail one of the best hyper-converged offerings actually out there right now.
Well, that is remarkably interesting. During the research, I could see that Dell showcases many cases, many examples where they use open source big data products like Hadoop, Spark, Kafka. And I was wondering whether you contribute to open source projects, and if so, does it help you accelerate the pace of building innovative products?
So myself personally, I do not. I have to admit, I'm unfortunately probably a little bit past that point in my career. I would love to, though. I just probably don't have the expertise as much as I want to. My team, on the other hand, and actually in general, Dell, as you mentioned, we are very big advocates in open source. There's a few angles to this discussion that I definitely would want to hit on. First off, we're always contributing when we need to contribute to open source, right? What I mean by that is because we are in the mode right now, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. If the technology is available, if that will accelerate our vehicle of delivery, we're going to go and try and actually consume that and use that. And many times that's going to be open source stuff. And many times we might need something to be updated, added, whatever it is. We are very open to actually doing pull requests within the communities, to actually contributing back, to even starting open source projects. We have no problem doing that. There's been many of them over the years that Dell's actually done. And the reality of it is open source is an extremely strategic, important part of Dell's growth in the future. Now, from a programs perspective, what I would tell you is when you look at things like our Apex program, right, when you get into cloud and stuff, there are many technologies in the space that have helped to solve where we need to go in cloud. And we are not afraid to use them to contribute back to those. And you're going to find that going forward, we're going to definitely have a larger presence within the open source space going forward, whether it's our streaming data platform type discussions when you get into the Kafkas and the Flinks and Sparks and all that, or whether you're actually looking back into our Apex offerings. They're going to play across more of the Ansibles, more of all the HashiCorp and all that type of stuff. We're definitely going to be big consumers as well as contributors back into those spaces. And on top of that, you're going to see Kubernetes kind of, just like every company out there, it's kind of the buzzword now. Kubernetes is going to be strewn through many pieces of the Dell portfolio going forward. So you're going to see us contributing into the Kubernetes ecosystem also.
Well, I absolutely love the idea that large enterprises contribute to open source ecosystem, which helps build the innovative products not only for them, but rather globally. Well, Brad, is there anything that I maybe should have asked you, but haven't, so you'd like to share with our audience?
Let's see. So I don't know if there's anything you should have asked me. One more area I can hit on that I think aligns pretty well to our conversations is when you start looking at kind of the future of where we're going, right? You look at innovation from a Dell perspective. One thing that I do want to throw out there is the notion of, right, we've talked about CI and HCI. We've talked about a little bit about Apex and open source. We as Dell are always looking beyond all that stuff as well. We're trying to figure out what does the future look like when we're moving into this cloud space, right? Hitting on Apex, we're hitting on enabling multi-cloud with hybrid cloud and on-premises type technologies, ensuring that the experiences that we actually get into our customers' hands are the right experiences. And in doing that, there's some keys to innovation that not everybody thinks about. Some people think about innovation sometimes, again, in a very technologically roadmap-oriented basis. One of the other areas that I actually am a big advocate for and believe in is innovation within the user experience space, right? When you look at the value of cloud, of Apex and the public cloud providers, Where is their innovation that they've delivered? Is there innovation under the covers? Yes. Is there innovation sets of technologies that are enabling different outcomes? Yes. But the biggest thing that people associate when they think of cloud is the experience. And we as Dell are pushing hard down this experience road to really deliver what we believe are next generation experiences from an innovative way across this multi-cloud world. And that's one area I want to make sure people understand out there is it's not just about a server and a storage array and a networking switch. It's about all of those things coming together to deliver an outcome. And if we can actually design infrastructure in more of that autonomous way, bringing it back to AI at the beginning, really applying AI and autonomous technologies to a full stack experience, you're going to see a lot of cool things coming out of Dell over the next 3 to 5 to 10 years that are going to be aligned into kind of across these domains.
Well, I can't think of a better note to end on. Brad, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a great pleasure to spend this morning talking with you about innovations, development in technology, and the insights from your distinguished career. It's been a great pleasure to have you here.
No, thank you. It's been great chatting with you also.